Good morning, everybody. Today is September 8th, 2021. The time is 12:06 p.m. and I'm calling to order the special meeting of the Board of Directors of the Alameda County Lead Poisoning Prevention Program. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic and pursuant to California Governor Gavin Newsom's Executive Order N-2920, the Alameda County Lead Poisoning Prevention Program Joint Powers Authority meeting of the Board of Directors will be available via teleconference. Members of the public may attend this in person at the Alameda County Healthy Homes Department located at 2000 Embarcadero, Suite 300 in Oakland, California. Members are also encouraged to watch the meeting online by clicking on the link posted in today's agenda. You may also phone in and dial into the webinar with the password provided in the agenda. If you are viewing this meeting via teleconference and you wish to provide written comment for an agenda item, you may email Leticia de la Fuente at her email address provided in the notice for today's meeting. Please include your name and identify the agenda item you're speaking for, so we can call you at public comment time. This time, I'm going to just note for the record that this meeting was set and the Zoom feature for this meeting did not enable video capability for anyone other than the host. We are unable to change that after the meeting has been started without sending a new link. And since we publicly noticed this meeting already with this link, the chair has opted to conduct this meeting recognizing that all the people who are usually on video are not today. So in recognition of that, what I'm asking, since I usually just look for hands, is that you please use the raise hand feature and that you please lower your hand when you're not speaking. Thank you. So that I can keep track of who is in queue to request to speak. So with that said, I will ask the board secretary to please call the roll.
Director Hardy. Absent. Hardy absent. Director Gallo.
Present.
Gallo present. Director Vela. Vela present. Director Winra.
Present.
Vela, Bowders. Winra present. Director Bowders.
Here.
Bowders present. Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. At this time, I'll entertain public comment. Directors, alternates, staff, or other members of the public who wish to speak for an item not on this agenda will be afforded 3 minutes to do so. If you are a member of the public, you may use the raise hand feature at the bottom of Zoom. If you have joined us by phone, you may press *9. Is there any member of the public or staff who wishes to speak for an item not on today's agenda? And did we receive any written comments, Leticia?
No written comment.
Okay, so I will close the public comment portion and move to the meeting minutes for July 22nd, 2021. Directors, raise your hand if you have any questions on the meeting minutes. If not, I will entertain a motion on the minutes.
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion by Director Gallo and a second by Director Wengraf to approve the minutes from July of 2021. Please call the roll.
Director Gallo.
Aye.
Gallo, aye. Director Vela. Director Vela.
Aye.
Vela, aye. Director Winra.
Aye.
Winra, aye. Director Bowders.
Aye.
Bowders, aye. Director Hardy. Director Hardy's absent.
Okay, the motion passes. The minutes are approved. We'll move to item 4, which is in-person meeting location. So members, the governor's executive order N-2920 is set to expire on September 30th. However, yesterday in committee, the Assembly Bill 361 was amended to extend this waiver of the Bagley-Keene and Brown Act provisions related to public in-person meetings until January 31st of 2022. That bill is up in committee later today in the Senate Judiciary. And if it passes, it will be on the floor in both houses over the next couple of days before session adjourns to interim session. It requires a 2/3 vote to pass as it's an urgency bill, provided that both houses pass it by a 2/3 vote and the governor signs it, it will take effect immediately. And so my suggestion is that we would continue these meetings virtually if this law passes through January 31st, so through our January meeting. And if it, for some reason, does not pass out of the legislature in the next couple of days or is not signed by the governor, what we just need to do is have a backup location in place for October. Every indication is that this bill will pass, as it has been a executive branch and legislative branch partnership on this issue. So what I'd like to do to just move to the meat of our agenda, unless there is an objection, I would like to offer and propose that the city of Emeryville will host the October meeting in the event that Assembly Bill 361 is not law. Is there any public comment on this item before I take discussion? Seeing
There's
none, there's no public comment. So seeing none, I will turn to Director Wengraf for comment.
Thank you, Chair Batters. I have a question. Is there any option for directors participating remotely if we post the notification at our location, at our local location?
Yeah, so if assuming that the current executive order is not extended as this bill would do, we would return to pre-COVID practices, which would mean that you would need to notify the clerk of your remote location to participate. The clerk would have to publish that address at least 7 days in advance in the notice as to your location, and that location would have to have a public posting on it. I believe 24 or 48 hours, Leticia will tell me, in advance at the location you're located, and it would need to be accessible at all times to the public in case a member of the public wished to attend. So we would return to normal Brown Act procedures.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts or objections to the city of Emeryville being the physical location in the event the law doesn't pass?
No, and thank you very much for offering that.
Okay. Directors Gaio or Vela, do you have any comments or thoughts related to the suggestion I've made?
No, thank you. And thank you for your work.
Okay. So what I'll do is Director Vela, do you have a comment?
I'm just going to say thank you for offering Emeryville City Hall, and that's where we were meeting. For those who are just tuning in, that's where we were meeting previously. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate the city of Emeryville hosting us.
Okay, great. So what I'll do is I'll make a motion to provide that we will continue our virtual meetings through January 31st, 2022 in the event that Assembly Bill 361 is signed into law as an urgency statute, and in the event that it is not signed into law between now and the October meeting for any reason, that the city of Emeryville will host the October 2021 JPA board meeting.
Second,
Okay, there's a motion by Bowders and a second by Wengraf. Please call the roll.
Director Gaio,
Aye.
Gaio, aye. Director Vela,
Aye.
Vela, aye. Director Winruff,
aye.
Winruff, aye. Director Bowders,
Aye.
Bowders, aye. Director Hardy,
Aye.
Hardy, aye.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. And that will be the direction for in-person meetings. We will need, if I will work with staff, but if for some reason if the law doesn't pass, we will need to revisit this again as an agenda item going forward, just to pick a permanent location if it's not going to be Emeryville. Okay. The next item is agenda item 5, which is the report by the city of Oakland on the lead settlement negotiations. And I understand we have some guests here. So what I'd like to do is ask if Director Brooks would guide me, because I don't see anybody, just guide me as to who will be speaking or presenting, and so I can facilitate that presentation.
Thank you, Director Bowders. Just briefly, at the last JPA meeting, Director Gaio indicated that he would be coming to this meeting with an update on the lead settlement discussions, and I do see that the Oakland team, with maybe one exception, is here. So perhaps what we can do is ask them to introduce themselves and their titles. I'll call out their names, and then after we get the introductions of the Oakland team, then they can let us know who is going to speak and share slides with us. So I do see the Oakland team leader is here, the Deputy City Administrator, Latanda Simmons.
Okay. So great. So let's welcome to you, Latanda. Sorry, I don't get to do any facial recognition of who you are today, but I appreciate you making time. I want to thank Director Gaio for working with the City Administrator's Office in Oakland to help facilitate and ensure your participation here today so that we can talk about something of mutual interest to all of us, which is making sure these lead settlement funds are made accessible to communities to do the work that we all collectively worked against the paint companies on. So I will recognize you at this time and allow you to unmute, and you can introduce your team and provide your presentation.
Thank you so very much. Greetings to all honorable members of the board, JPA. I want to introduce myself. I am Latonda Simmons, the Assistant City Administrator here with the City of Oakland, team lead for the organization as it relates to the conversations that we have had with the county related to this very important matter. I bring with me and want to respect that we'll be going in sort of an off order here. I bring with me the team helping to aggregate the information that we are very excited to present to you today, and the same team that will continue in the productive conversations with the county partners that we have here to make the determinations on how these dollars are used, as well as how we address the needs of those who have the greatest needs here. I offer Mr. Bill Gilchrist, who, as you well know, serves as backup to our voting member, Councilmember Gaio. Mr. Gilchrist, you may offer your greetings.
Yes. Sorry, good afternoon to all. Very good to see all of you virtually, if not facially, but good group. I enjoyed my service here and I'm very happy to support Director Gaio.
I'm Jumbo, Mr. Gilchrist.
Thank you so much for that.
Buona.
Oh, you guys are doing that thing again. Okay, great, and thank you for that. Moving now to Director Flynn, who is our Director of Race and Equity. Director Flynn, you may offer your greetings.
Good afternoon, staff and representatives. I am so happy to be here with you. I'm the Director of the Department of Race and Equity and have been helping to manage the process to develop a racial equity impact analysis to guide decisions about programming and approach. Thank you for having us.
Welcome, Ms. Flynn.
And also introducing Maribel Tobias, who joins us as our partner and consultant in the development of the data analysis. Maribel, if you may offer your greetings.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here and talk to you today about racial equity in lead.
Thank you for being here.
And also joined by Malia McPherson in the Office of the City Attorney as well. Malia, if you may wish to offer your greetings as well.
Great to be here, and thank you all, and thank you, Latonda.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much. We now will turn the presentation over to Darlene Flynn and Maribel Tobias so that they may begin with the presentation. Darlene?
Yes. If someone could please, we will be able to share the slides, right?
Yeah, if you use the share screen green button in the bottom center of your Zoom, you should be able to access anything that's open on your desktop, and then that will be visible to all of us when you select it.
Great. Maribel, you want to handle the slides?
Sure.
While Maribel is doing this, I'm actually coming to you remotely from sunny Seattle, Washington. I'm on vacation there, and so my equipment is not quite as sophisticated. I'm not going to try to do anything tricky from my surface here. Okay. Thank you, Maribel. So we're presenting to you actually in the form of an update the summary of findings from a racial equity impact analysis that Maribel Tobias has been working on for us for a while now, and to present to you also the approach that we're using that it's part of. So doing this racial equity impact analysis is a very important part of coming to an equitable solution or an equitable program or an equitable approach, however you want to think about it. And so she has been doing this technical work for us because I'm a working director of a department of 3. And so on something this important and impactful, we sometimes engage consultants to help us do this work. And it's an efficient and also effective way of getting more eyes on the data and the information that we need to take into consideration. So I'll be doing part of the presentation, and then she'll be taking over for part of it. And my part is really to talk about what is an equity approach. So next slide, please. First of all, we always want to ground ourselves in our purpose, and this is directly from the settlement, and it talks about what we shall do, or what we were charged to do with regard to our efforts in developing and enhancing programs, in providing services to individuals, particularly children who've been exposed to lead, and of course, to look at both the aspects of avoiding exposure and mitigating lead paint. So this is the broad and comprehensive purpose that we're working under. Next slide, please. Because of the municipal commitment in our municipal code to equity and doing an equity approach on all of our major undertakings, we layer on another layer that didn't necessarily come in the settlement, because it's not yet, unfortunately, enough mainstream to have had these kinds of parameters mentioned in that original directive we were given. So what we do is we have committed to making sure that we intentionally integrate fair and just into all that we do. This is our city commitment to anything and everything that we are working on. And of course, something as big as this and as racialized as lead poisoning is in our nation, not just in Oakland or Alameda County, this is a very relevant issue with regard to lead. And we define inequities as differences in well-being that disadvantage one individual or group in favor of another. We know and we acknowledge that these differences are systematic, patterned, unfair, and that they can be changed, but they will not change themselves. This inequitable treatment, and this is what we talk about when we talk about systemic racism, is baked into all of our institutions and all of our ways of thinking about different groups of people. They are there whether we want them to be there or not. It's not about whether or not we're good people. It's about whether or not we're dealing with it. Because if we don't deal with it intentionally and overtly, we know that our outcomes will default back into the system that has been in place for a long time and has a great deal of power over everything that we do. So if we are going to challenge systemic patterns that are so deeply embedded in our environment, in our government, in our other institutions, in our day-to-day interactions, and so on, we have to take a very intentional and disciplined approach. This kind of a study helps us be disciplined because it starts us in a different place. Typically, government, even in its best intentions or best days, we jump in and we start to do things to the best of our ability and based on the assumptions that we have, without asking ourselves a lot of critical questions that would lead us or enable us to end up in a different place this time than we usually end up. If we don't do that, it is very predictable. And we have many, many data points that show we end up in the same place, even though we didn't intend to. So since these outcomes are caused by past and current decisions, we're at a very important decision point about what to do with lead abatement and addressing lead risk in Alameda County and the city of Oakland. So we have basically commissioned this study to help us get started with an equity focus. Next slide, please. So there are some things that we look for. This is just some background and framing. How do we know when we are doing equity? Because equity has become very popular, particularly in the last year. It has taken off exponentially. And everybody's talking about equity. Everybody's looking for a director or a manager of equity around the country right now because of the uprising that we experienced. And this is how social change happens oftentimes. So we're in a very active movement time now. But I've actually been involved in this work in municipal government for over 15 years. I started in Seattle, Washington, where this kind of approach at the municipal level was designed, and I got to be one of the original architects of that program. And we've now been working on it here in Oakland. And one of the things we know we have to do is help people to see, and that's the magnifying glass, when is it equity and when is it not? When are we using equity language, but not necessarily taking equity action? And it's not about what we say, it is about what we do. And because this is new behavior, it's it needs to be socialized into our organizations. The city of Oakland brought this technology in to begin to socialize the city of Oakland. And we've actually been working on it for 5 years now. So we have the opportunity in the city of Oakland to be pretty fluid in this. We're not perfect, and we're still developing in many, many areas to be more effective and more have more impact around equity issues. But we have begun to socialize these ideas. So here are some key ideas. When we're doing equity, proposals are data-driven. They have an intentional focus on closing racial disparities. And again, we talked earlier about what a racial disparity is. That's a documentable difference in outcomes for a person or group of people that are defined by race or gender or some other category of social interaction. They are outcome focused, which means not only do we start with data, but we continue to monitor the data to see if we're getting the outcomes with regard to racial equity that we are looking for. They're influenced by perspectives of communities most impacted by the disparities. We have learned that transparency and the ability to engage our public and how we're thinking, whether or not we're getting it right, but how we're thinking, how we're driving, how we're making our decisions, not just doing things to people, but letting people behind the curtain to see how we're getting there so they can understand what the processes are that we're going through and that they can input into those processes when it is appropriate. Well, it's always appropriate, but when it's possible. Is probably a better way of putting it. So we know that in order to get equitable outcomes, we have to remove barriers to access to opportunity and successful life outcomes. It's these barriers that are built in and were built in a long time ago and are built into our typical, I'm going to say typical government practices that keep people out of services, keep people out of participation, keep people out of having a say in their government oftentimes. But whatever the barrier is about, we want to be about removing them. And we can find them by asking the community, what are the barriers? What's not working for you? How could we do it better? What are the root causes of your lack of access and how can we correct them? It's an iterative process. It's not about it's not about releasing the responsibility that local government has. It is about exercising that responsibility differently than government usually does. And then we know that as we go forward, we must have measurements to track that those impacted by racial disparities are better off as a result of our proposal, of our action, of our whatever it is that we're doing. That means we have to have data collection systems that are disaggregated by race that tell us whether or not we're reaching the hardest to serve populations as we go forward and whether or not what we're doing is working for them. Because we can have programming that works very well for people who know how to exercise access to government and not be working at all for people that experience various kinds of barriers in working with government opportunity, government services, and so on. Next slide. I will turn it over to Mary Bell now.
Thank you, Darlene, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here today again. So as Darlene stated, we're here today to talk about designing equitable lead policy and how to dismantle and reverse the disparate impacts of lead poisoning on vulnerable communities in Oakland and Alameda County. So this racial equity impact assessment is a very important moment in time because it presents an opportunity, a crossroads. A chance to pivot away from business as usual and do things dramatically differently through a disciplined equity approach. So really, the REA and this approach is grounded in identifying the impacts on marginalized communities so that policymakers can direct extra funds to provide more support for vulnerable low-income communities facing higher rates of lead poisoning than Flint, Michigan. And once we identify these priority areas, as Darlene mentioned, we can track what happens in those communities to measure the equitable impacts. And so this framework really is about looking at Alameda County on a census tract by census tract basis to identify the disparities facing low-income communities and communities of color, and provides a straightforward data-oriented methodology for prioritizing the highest risk neighborhoods. So I gathered the data in this RAIA for two reasons. First is to update the data sets found in earlier reports. And the second is really to highlight the cumulative factors that make communities more vulnerable to lead paint hazards. And becoming aware of these different indicators and how different census tracts show up is a highly effective way of determining which program services to target to those census tracts and different populations. For example, you will see that Latinx communities in East Oakland will be a huge focus of this work. And they are facing disproportionate impacts. So it will be important to ensure cultural sensitivity and communications in Spanish, for instance. So before I jump into a little bit more about the data, I just want to say who I am and why this is important to me. So I began my career as a civil rights and environmental justice attorney. And I really see my role as being helpful. So I'm really, throughout my 15-year career, I have worked to gather data and explain that data with the emphasis on being helpful. And so that's what I'm here to do today, is really to work alongside local and regional governments to develop these policies. So, oops, I skipped ahead. So on this slide, I gathered data from what's called the California Environmental Screening Tool, or CalEnviroScreen, which tracks 22 indicators of both population factors and pollution factors. And one of the indicators is lead paint risk. This is a new indicator that Cal EPA added to this tool this year. The indicator in the tool measures the percentage of homes with likely lead paint hazards and the percentage of low-income households with children in each census tract to come up with a final score. So what you are looking at here shows 116 census tracts with high lead risks. That is above the 75th percentile statewide. So what CalEnviroScreen does is measures these indicators and then ranks every census tract in the state of California, so that you know when you're looking at a census tract where it ranks vis-a-vis every other census tract in the state. So of roughly 336 census tracts in Alameda County, 116 are above the 75th percentile statewide. Now, because equity is about drilling down to look at the most impacted communities, I isolated the 22 or 25 truly most burdened census tracts. And of those 25, 22, the top 22 are all located in Oakland. With respect to the general risks, all 22 of those census tracts are actually ranked in the top 5% of census tracts statewide. So when we look at the burden, it's really concentrating down into these census tracts. And 14 of these 22 that are located in Oakland also are disadvantaged communities as defined by the state of California. And then finally, the last piece of information on this slide compares these census tracts with the data that's gathered by the state of California on where lead poisoned children have been found. So in each of these 22 census tracts, more than 5 lead poisoned children were found over the last 5 years. And the number of lead poisoned children per census tract ranges from 5 to 44. So in the racial equity impact assessment, I went ahead and disaggregated every census tract in Alameda County by race, by the predominant race of that census tract. And I've listed here all of the predominantly Hispanic or Latinx census tracts in Oakland. And I've paired that with how they scored on that indicator that I just showed you. So we can see from this chart that every single predominantly Latinx census tract in Oakland is in the top 10% of all census tracts in the state of California. So they are extremely burdened. I didn't put it in this slideshow, but if I show you a chart of the census tracts that are predominantly white, you will see the opposite impacts of this screen. So I gathered data on multiple indicators because I wanted to explore all the different dimensions of the vulnerabilities that communities face. They face heightened exposure to lead risk. They face heightened susceptibility or sensitivity to lead hazards. And they also face high poverty, which limits their ability to protect themselves from these hazards. And so one indicator that measured social vulnerability is from the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, Social Vulnerability Index. So this map shows the location of the highly vulnerable census tracts in Alameda County. And this slide shows you the predominant race of each of those highly burdened census tracts. So this is isolating the top 15, and we find that of the top 15, 14 are predominantly Hispanic or Latinx. And again, these top 14 are all located in Oakland. Sorry, 15. This next slide just presents a map that shows where the oldest housing units are in Alameda County. As we know, the older the housing unit is, the more likely it is to contain lead paint hazards. And we even know that some of the lead paints that were used earlier before the 40s had a higher content of lead. So the older the housing unit, the more the likelihood of exposure to lead hazards. So this here is another map that shows CalEnviroScreen results. Now we are looking at the distribution of cumulative burdens. So this is how census tracts in Alameda score on all of the indicators that were measured by CalEnviroScreen 4.0. And the state of California calls the census tracts that are above the 75th percentile here disadvantaged communities. So there are 38 total disadvantaged communities in Alameda County, and of those 38, 32 are in Oakland. And as an environmental justice issue, as an equity issue, we know that these are the areas that are just facing the greatest needs. They are overexposed to pollution, as well as overexposed to vulnerability issues. So this final slide is just a way of pointing out how that analysis can be used. So on this slide, I chose to go by the lead risk indicator and ranked census tracts by that indicator. But I also included the data on, on how many children were lead poisoned in each of those census tracts, as well as their overall cumulative burden score, so that we can see across indicators how different census tracts show up. And the use of these different indicators also demonstrates the importance of not relying solely on elevated blood lead levels, blood testing to identify the areas for intervention, but instead using this risk approach, we can intervene in these areas before a child has even been tested for lead. And we can do targeted lead testing efforts in areas that have low lead testing rates or high numbers of children with lead poisoning. So what to do with all of this data? Really, the equity research demonstrated that we need to have comprehensive, proactive, and targeted strategies. We need to implement ways that that we can meet primary prevention standards, which means eliminating lead hazards before a child is tested and before a child is poisoned. And using this geographically phased approach can help target the areas that are most in need of funding and ensure that these areas receive the funding first, and the funds, which are limited in nature, can be used to address the most intractable and entrenched harms. And other aspects of the equitable approach include ensuring that funding is available for low-income homeowners and property owners who might otherwise struggle financially to meet these requirements, making funding available to support them, and also ensuring that strong anti-displacement and tenant protection measures are in place and enforced. So I would like to pass it back to Darlene at this time.
Okay.
Thank you. What was that?
I said, okay, back to Darlene.
Okay, thanks. So we know that this is going to require ongoing comprehensive data collection in order for us to know whether or not we're achieving all those things that are listed above. And so this is something that the city of Oakland is prepared as we move into our next phase of dealing with hazardous housing situations, that we see this as part of creating the program so that in the future we'll be able to report back what we have achieved and what the outcomes have been for these most vulnerable communities. Next slide, please. There are some key areas, and they were alluded to in that previous slide, but in this slide, you'll see beneath each bullet some more detail. Proactive inspections, prioritizing vulnerable communities, improve ongoing ability to screen for lead hazards and other hazards simultaneously, prioritize the focus on areas and populations most likely to live in high-risk dwellings and most vulnerable to being locked in there. So one of the things that happens for people who, let's say a new homeowner comes into one of these high-risk areas and buys a piece of property, cash on the barrelhead, one of the first things they would do would be remove the lead risk. And move their family in, right? That's what they would do. That's what people with resources do because they want to protect their children. They're more likely to know about the risk and more likely to be able to take care of it. Whereas people that are communities that are highly vulnerable, that are very low income, and that are not homeowners are subjected to being locked into or stuck in these poisonous and hazardous environments. So we want to focus on the areas and populations most likely to be stuck in high-risk dwellings. And this is going to be primarily Black, Indigenous, people of color in areas where the housing is old. So it really, when you think about it this way, it's not that difficult to figure out how to target resources. Doesn't mean that others cannot participate in the program, but when it comes to the energy and activity of the county and the city, the equitable approach would be to target our activities toward outreach and so on, and prioritization of where we launch proactive rental inspection in areas where people are less likely to be able to do it for themselves, to fix it for themselves, or even if they're living in a rental, be free to complain about conditions that they might be living in and force a landlord to repair it. We want to make sure that government is stepping in that gap for people who are highly vulnerable and not likely to be able to either fix it for themselves or engage, or likely to come to the city or the county and say, we're living in a dangerous situation, please intervene. So this is it. It means a whole mindset and prioritization process that helps us to figure out how to fund these activities for low-income homeowners who provide housing to low-income people and to low-income people that are renting from other maybe corporate property owners who are not taking care of their business. So we can sort that out in the way we design the program. We know transparency and oversight is an ongoing and very critical part of this. If we do not design a program where the community can actively monitor how we're doing, we won't really know how we're doing, because we can easily assume that we're having an impact that we are not yet having. But the community is our backstop, is our feedback loop to help us know how this is changing conditions for them in their community or not. And we know that we want people to keep on asking us to figure out how to get more resources, how to be more timely and efficient in our approach, because lead poisoning is time sensitive. This means that this is it's going to be an ongoing program that's going to need ongoing funding, and this oversight by the public helps us find additional funding as well, because we build the community support for the program that we're running. The community helps us find funding, either from higher up the governmental food chain or from philanthropy or whatever the case might be. This transparency leads to more of a collaborative partnership with the community that actually helps government in the long run be more effective in finding resources and in making sure that we're hitting the bullseye, right? That we're in the zone. Because if we're in the zone, the people will help us fight for more. And we sometimes need that help, right? It's a political environment, et cetera. Displacement is a big concern. We know that when communities improve, when housing stock is improved and so on and so forth, it can cause displacement, either by causing rents to go up or by causing it to be more attractive to competitive renters or buyers. And so we have to think about that as we implement this. How do we make sure that the tenant protections, particularly for renters, are in place and we don't create more homelessness or displacement through our actions? Then we know that this is an opportunity for communities like Oakland, where there is a huge economic disparity that is driven by lack of access to living wage jobs that keep up with the cost of housing and so on in the Bay Area. And this will be an opportunity, because we're going to be expanding the activity around lead abatement to do targeted workforce development in the city of Oakland in partnership with our workforce development folks, and increase the networking with small and local contractors to get them to get them certified so they can take advantage of doing this work and thus increase economic viability for small and local contractors in particularly that are concentrated in Oakland and other like communities in Alameda County. Finally, public education and targeted outreach. This is always a challenge. It's an ongoing challenge to reach hard to reach communities. The city of Oakland has developed quite a bit of expertise. We have brought in a person who has a high level of expertise in my department, and we are training our folks throughout the city to do outreach differently, because the way we have done it has been proven not to reach the people who are most impacted by racial disparities. So we have best practices and ways of approaching this that actually do make a huge difference in outcomes. And we've proven that on various equity approaches that we have taken in the city of Oakland already. We know we can replicate it on this as well. And then finally, ongoing equity evaluation, which means we've got to track on an ongoing basis how we're doing and whether or not we're closing these racial disparities. Next slide, please. So here's the bottom line. This racial equity impact analysis, it's an independent evaluation based on data, as you've seen. And the quantitative data that we've looked at reveals that around 70% of the most vulnerable census tracts in Alameda County are located in the city of Oakland. This is not surprising, by the way. This is historically driven. It's not an accident that populations that are going to be most vulnerable to blood lead poisoning would be concentrated in within Alameda County in Oakland, California. Black, Indigenous, and people of color were bordered into Oakland, California, and into the flatlands of Oakland, California by the city of Oakland. So it's a two-tiered thing. All the communities around us said, we're not going to build multifamily affordable housing, and we're going to put in covenants that don't allow Black, Brown, and Asian folks to buy property in the suburbs, which then borders those populations into the areas that are more accommodating. City of Oakland added another layer by the application of the redlining map specifically to the city of Oakland and the relegation of Black, Indigenous, and people of color to the flatlands of the city of Oakland, which is where the majority of this poisonous housing stock is, the oldest housing stock in the city. So this is not an accident that it came out this way. This is a function of history and the history of structural and institutional racism as it applies to housing access. So this is the bill coming due of decades of policy that was implemented and endorsed by all of the governments that could have touched it or pushed it in a different direction. So we're now dealing with those outcomes, and that's why we have to do this intentional equity work in order to address those impacts. So the city is positioning to implement an Oakland-specific lead risk abatement equitably in coordination with our code enforcement. We can do this simultaneously. We are actually using the same data that was gathered by our consultant. We can coordinate this and direct this in an equitable direction because of the practice that we've been working on. It takes a minute to get this practice going in a jurisdiction. And we've been working really hard at it for a while now. So we are positioned to be able to make these two things come together, I think, very effectively. And finally, we're going to have the funding to do that. We can't do it without the funding. So addressing the lead hazards in Oakland may require closer to a 60 or 70% of funding availability for lead hazard abatement. So this report sets us up to understand that more deeply and to have a conversation about that as we move forward. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about outcomes because this is where government falls off the track. And it also goes along with accountability. The online Webster Dictionary definition of accountability uses government not being accountable as an example of the opposite thing. And it does that because government has a long history of not being accountable, particularly to the communities that have been marginalized by systemic and structural racism. So in order for us to break out of those molds that have been going on for a couple hundred years now, we have to make sure that we are measuring outcomes not by inputs, how many children we tested for lead or how many even how many buildings we remediated or addressed, but we have to ask ourselves these deeper questions and measure for them. Is anyone better off? And who is better off? Who did the work make a difference for? How will we know if the solution worked? What is the intended impact? How will we know? How will we know? How will we be? And I ask this question all the time when we're talking about how do we know? And right now, we don't know very well. And that's just because this equity lens hasn't been applied yet to this work. But we will know in the future, because if we don't, then we're not yet implementing equitably. So articulating meaningful measures is the difference between doing business as usual, which has produced racially inequitable outcomes for generations, and being accountable for the impact of our work to fulfill Oakland's commitment to equity. So this is really, really important to our communities that are actually the ones who are suffering from the history of this entire situation. Next slide, please. We have identified key action areas that need to be paid attention to, ground truthing program design options with the communities who are most impacted, identifying, again, doing that drilling down into areas and vulnerable population using indicators and so on in the design of the lead abatement program, developing a methodology for early and comprehensive proactive inspections, again, not just following the blood lead tests, but looking at the risk of that happening and getting ahead over time, ahead of that curve. And then we want to build and maintain a central mainframe to systemize data collection so that we will be able to demonstrate to the public and to ourselves how well we are doing, and make course corrections that will undoubtedly be necessary. It is so rare to launch something this big and this comprehensive and to get every element perfectly the first time. It is ongoing and evolving. If we are not evaluating our programs on an ongoing basis through an equity lens and making necessary adjustments, we will fall behind again. We will gradually drift back to business as usual. And then this tenant protection issue is a tricky and difficult one. We have to design how that will work. It's not designed yet. We just know it needs to be addressed. Also, the same goes for how we're going to work with low-income landlords and homeowners so that they don't lose their properties over this, and so that they can have wealth to pass on to future generations. And those low-income landlords and property owners are going to be disproportionately Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the city and in most of Alameda County. So finally, we will need to stand up a targeted workforce development program, working with the expertise that's available at the county and so on, but targeted at small and local contractors in the city of Oakland and elsewhere. Next slide, please. Wrap this up. Coming down the home stretch. Or is this the last one? No, it's not. I know there's one more. At least. Next slide, please.
This is the last one that's showing up for me.
Oh, really?
Let me see if I can fix that.
I was looking for a slide about all these things. Many of these things that are here on this slide require a high level of technical expertise. I think that probably Bill and I can actually just talk about it, Mary Bell.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Yeah, Mary Bell, don't worry about that. Let's just
it was just a place.
We're good. We're good. If you go ahead and, okay, fine. Yeah, and I'll just jump in and very briefly. A lot of information provided here and some very specific targeting, looking at areas in the community that have greatest need. And when we're looking at lead, that has its own cohort of information, association, demography, location, everything that we've been looking at over the last almost hour now. And how we lean into the program in working with our partners at the county, where our relative capacities exist, where we have our strengths. We need to look at a formulation of setting up a program, and we're going to need some assistance technically in order to do that. So we're looking at putting together an RFP proposal scope that would help us engage our key stakeholders as identified in the presentation, look at the best practices and case studies that correlate with Oakland's program objectives. Many of this is information we can build on from a lot of the reconnaissance that we've done for the proactive rental program. And Larry has been a great partner in helping us advance those conversations with other jurisdictions. We've also had several since then. We need to also make a clear determination, and this is to Darlene's, one of Darlene's more recent points, that we are setting the scale to meet the specific performance metrics. So within any given year, especially knowing that we have this amount of backlog and existing inventory, what do we expect to be able to do over a period of time? And of course, as we kick into this program, there's going to be discovery. we may find that situations may be more egregious or even less than what we projected through these kind of analyses. So we're going to have to be mobile. It's again, no plan survives first encounter. So we'll have to also use, ramping up of these programs as a indicator too of where we may need to make modifications. We also want to look at our own regulatory framework in Oakland to see if we need to make any adoptions, modifications, changes to what we have in terms of enforcement frameworks now. And then pulling that together for a final recommendation and how we move forward around staffing, resources, and operating and implementation schedule. So we want to lean in again to get some strong expertise to help us there. Now, in the meantime, we also have been running our analysis and our work with our proactive rental. I think Darlene or Maribel may have mentioned earlier, there's a lot of shared data we've been using. Of course, on the proactive scenario, there are many more targets that we're looking at in terms of existing conditions than just the lead per se. But there's so much still that overlaps and corresponds between areas in greatest need and where we need to focus our program's kickoff. So we are finalizing our impact study with that program and actually been making modifications on right sizing it to get it started, and where we have our front end support that we can use in order to put the program in place as we're bringing people on through our hiring positions, budgeting positions and bringing them in. So just wanted to mention that. And I think there was perhaps one other slide, and one that we really would love to have, because it speaks again to the city-county partnership around outreach and testing coordination. And there's going to be a lot of other capacity leverage that we can use with our county partners and they can use with us. We've been having some great ongoing conversations with them, sort of unpacking all of this in real time. And there it is. That's the slide. Thank you. So if you can maybe enlarge that. And Latanda, I might also turn this to you if there are any points you'd like to make here as well. But I think this is really just a springboard to looking at how we dovetail with the great work that in capacity that we can each bring, to this relationship, to our partnership, and moving forward, both in terms of identifying the areas of need, but as Darlene was saying, making sure that we're all targeting the same intentional outcomes. So again, really looking to build on the relationship that we've established with the county on these initiatives. And Latanda, I will turn it over to you if there's anything else you'd like to say.
Thank you so very much, Bill, Maribel, and Darlene. I just wanted to, and Bill, it really could not be said any better than how you've phrased it. I just wish to offer that the city and the county have such an opportunity to be as targeted as the intent of the use of the funds in their designation, to perform great work in the city and to create a model that is sustainable, reaching and continuing to support this very important work, because we know that the measure of what we have before us, just in terms of settlement conversations, is insufficient in terms of addressing the totality of all needs. I'd also say that we are very gratified that the county, in their presentations and the information that they have brought forward in terms of the historic context and also their own infrastructure, have proven very important to our development in terms of our thinking, along with this data and how we build the systems and processes to be able to perform this very important work. And so we look forward to continuing the remaining discussions as to additional details, but we thank the JPA and the members here for allowing us to come before you and to present this information. I would pause here, and if there are questions, I would avail the team to be able to respond to questions.
Okay, thank you very much for a very thorough presentation. Before I turn to directors for questions and comments, Leticia, did we receive any public comment for this item?
No public comment?
Okay, thank you. And directors, remember, I don't have the pleasure of seeing you and just raising your hand. So if you use the raise hand feature, if you have questions or comments, I'll call on directors at this time to ask questions. We'll start with Director Gallo.
Yes, thank you. And thanks to all of you for joining us in this meeting. And thanks to the Oakland team for sharing the information, the data, and the greatest need that we have here in Alameda County. I think for those of us that have grown up here in Oakland and East Oakland in particular, we clearly recognize that we have an emergency every day. And many times Alameda County and the city of Oakland are negligent in terms of delivering a service. I mean, right now we're going through the pandemic experience, and it took a lot of effort to get the vaccine locations started in Oakland, as well as the testing sites. And here, we're talking about, an issue, an item that all of us historically have known for many, many years. And, we can talk a lot about race and equity, but I think it's more about delivering. It's not about what you say, but what we do. And certainly I would ask for all of your support on this JPA committee to recognize the study that was done. And it is factual. It's something we have known that Oakland has the greatest need when it comes to this item. And also at the same time, we do need to create a program that delivers a service and continues to serve our needy children in this location. When it comes to the funding level, for me, it's very clear that if we have the greatest need, that Oakland deserves to receive the greatest support financially. And not just 30%, not 25%, but I think we're looking at 60 to 70%. And I think we need to support that. And for me, it's what it comes down to is recognizing, honoring children and families that have a need. And many times we overlook that need based on our politics and our friendships and where we live. And but having grown up here in East Oakland, certainly I see it on a daily basis. And I would ask for your ultimate support. And hopefully, through Alameda County, through their leadership, whether it's the supervisors, the attorneys, and directors would agree and join us in this effort to work together to serve those that have the greatest need when it comes to the lead paint and the homes that we have, because many of us, we don't have too many choices. We have to rent certain facilities to survive in this time. And so with that, I want to, make sure that the questions are answered. But for me, I feel very strongly living here right off of Fruitvale Avenue and seeing my neighbors and seeing what they're going through, and have the county join us in working together in a partnership to address Alameda County's greatest need when it comes to services. So thank you for the time, and I look forward to being part of answering any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Director Gallo. Director Wengraf.
Well, thank you very much for this presentation. There's tremendous amount of information in it. And I'm wondering if you could make this presentation available to us, maybe with a link or something, because I'd like to be able to go over it and pull out of it some data that I can share with my colleagues. And also I want to thank Councilmember Gallo for your comments and for your dedication to the residents of East Oakland. Thank you.
Thank you. So to the request that was made, Latanda or Bill, if it's acceptable to either of you, if you would share that PowerPoint with the Alameda County Healthy Home staff, they can then disseminate it with the board so that we all have a copy of the information you presented.
Most certainly.
Thank you. Next from Supervisor Chan's office, we have Dave Brown, recognized.
Thank you, Chair Bowders. Okay, a couple questions. First one for Director Brooks. If the presentation flagged, or at least mentioned, there was 116 census tracts that had high lead contamination, but we only looked at about 25 of them. Do we have a list of those census tracts, where they are, and the levels of lead exposure that for the community?
This is Larry Brooks here. We do have some of that data. We are also very, very interested in collecting the data that the Oakland team has presented to you so that we can look at that in order to respond to their proposal. I believe the presentation that the city has given, we really appreciate it because I know the JPA has been concerned over the last almost 3 years now as to what we were doing with regards to the settlement discussions as children were being lead poisoned, and directors felt that this money could be put to good use if we could reach some type of resolution on this. So during that period of time, I know there may have been some frustration from the JPA because I could not really speak on what was going on, could not share a lot of the data that we were exchanging with the Oakland team in order to try to reach a resolution. So I'm really relieved now that the city has come forward with this presentation, made it public so that we can open up more in regards to sharing information with the JPA. With that in mind, I think that we have also requested that the Oakland team give us copies of these slides. So I appreciate the fact that Director Wingraf has requested those too. We had seen these slides, a slightly different version of it back on August 12th. And so we have been anxious to get copies of the slides to do some further analysis and compare some of the data to the data that we have. We also are anxious to receive the actual race and equity impact assessment report that these slides are based on. And I think that the JPA would probably be interested in receiving that as well, so that we can then compare data and share it with you.
Thank you. So the other question, maybe it's more of a comment, but just to clarify for the Oakland team, there was that slide around the partnership with the county. And I guess what I'm curious to know is, are you expecting that with your proposal that the work to be done will be filtered through or funneled through the Healthy Homes Department within the county? Or is there going to be work done outside of that and separately? Because I mean, I know there's the proactive rental inspection process, but I guess in terms of just the remediation, because we have a whole program in place. So I'm just kind of curious how you envision that.
Thank you. This is Latanda Simmons, just speaking on behalf of the city. What I'd like to say in response to the question is that there are a number of conversations that remain before us in terms of our work with the county. Just to underscore about 4 quick points in addition to a response to that question, is we recognize that the county has infrastructure in place to be able to aid in the precision of this work. And we look forward to building the details of how that may be exercised in the execution of the intentional focus of lead abatement as we have presented. I would say that we also have the consultant here and of course, Director Flynn, who can speak to the absorption of the data in terms of what data we use to build the narrative that we have provided to you in terms of the analysis. And I think it does serve to be important that portions of our data obviously were derived from a great deal of information that the county did share with us. I'd also say that as it relates to that specific data that was provided to us, we too are also anticipating the release of our document in the forthcoming days. I want to just submit my own apologies to the JPA board. I too am out of the office respectfully dealing with the matter of bereavement, which was unanticipated, obviously, and that has actually contributed in some ways to a little bit of a bottleneck with respect to the work. And so we anticipate getting the data out to all as soon as possible. I offer Director Flynn and Mary Bell Tobias to be able to provide any additional responses to clarify the data uses and any essence that they wish to provide to the board here related to the information we've provided.
Sure. Yes, I can jump in to say that the data around lead risk is all derived from the CalEnviro Screen 4.0. which can be accessed from their website, and the raw data can be downloaded from the website as well. So that is the source of the lead data, as well as the Callan Bioscreen scores and percentile.
Great, thank you.
I guess I would add that there are some aspects of this work that are clearly within the realm of public health and beyond anything that the city could do. But I think one of the things that we want to talk about is things that the city can do. We want to have a leadership role in that because of our equity focus and our equity expertise, and the fact that this doesn't just happen. And I think I get to speak a lot nationally and regionally. And I think what a lot of people think is because they have good intentions, we think we have good intentions, right? And we do have good intentions 99.9% of the time, that they have the expertise that they need to implement an equity program. And this is what this is one of the things the city is bringing to the table, and how that fits into who does what, we haven't figured out, other than we know we really want public health to be public health, because we don't have anything that can touch that. But there are some things that could be performed here or there. So that'll be the crux of the conversation.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, do you have any more questions?
No, I'm good.
Okay, thank you. Director Vella?
Thanks, Chair Bowders. Thank you, City of Oakland staff, for this presentation. I think in many ways, it provided a visual to what we all knew or thought the need, where the needs would be. And it really, I think, showed us, the work that we have cut out for ourselves. That said, I think, and this is part of the presentation, but the word equity is getting thrown around a lot. Lots of people are talking about equity. To me, I just want to make sure, and I want to make this very clear. I don't want us to just continue to talk about equity. I actually want to make sure that we get going on implementing. And I think my concern is just making sure that we find a way to get to actually get started on the work. And I want to thank Latanda. I want to thank you for participating today. I know that you're out on bereavement, and my condolences for your loss. I think this board has really wanted, our focus has really been on the timeline and understanding, how do we get to actually providing the services to those in most need. And I will put it out there. I represent the city of Alameda. That said, I know what the data says. I'm not arguing with the data, and I want to make sure that we are spending our money in a way that is going to have the greatest impact for those who need it the most. So I to that end, we also know that, the money that we spend now can make a huge difference. And the longer that we wait, the more likelihood that there's going to be continued, lead poisoning. I'm a mother of 2 young children. This hits home for me. Not that you have to be a parent in order to feel that, but I just I want to make sure that we are, spending the dollars as soon as possible. I want to make sure that it goes to the census tracts that need it the most. And I think in the capacity, at least as I see it in my capacity on this board, is to make sure that we do just that. And we have, you have my commitment to work towards, an equitable usage of these funds. I really what I want to get started on is, what is the timeline? When do we start? How do we actually make sure that we can roll this out in a way that we're not wasting money on bureaucracy, that we're not wasting time on bureaucracy. This isn't just a question for the city of Oakland. This is a question for all of our staff. how do we get around, and break through this bureaucratic cycle? How do we make sure that the money is not just spent on administration, but the dollars go directly to the people that need it the most? And what is that timeline? When do we think we can get things up and running? What do we need to put in place? What are the kind of the timeline goals that we need to put in place in order to meet those needs? So that's, I know I'm not asking an easy question, but I think, there's been a tremendous amount of work that's gone into this in terms of compiling the data and showing us exactly what we thought to be true. So let's, how do we get to the actual implementation and the timeline? And I just want to thank you all for your work on this and assure you that I'm certainly committed to making sure that that's the outcome. And I want to thank Councilmember Gallo, for advocating for his constituents. In a way, we share constituents through this JPA, making sure that we truly make sure that folks have healthy homes. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Vella. Are there others who have comments or questions? Okay, Director Wingraf.
Yeah, thank you. Just following up on Director Vella's comments, if I could summarize, it seems like what we would like to see is an action plan. And I don't know if we as an agency have any authority to request that. But I would like to hear from others on the call about how do we get from the report we just received to an action plan.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that. I agree that we need to get there. I want to recognize what may be Director Hardy. Is that what we have there? Yes, go ahead, Director Hardy.
Ms. Hardy has a question.
Okay.
Well, not necessarily a question or comment. I mean, as you all know, my organization, Pueblo, brought about this lead poisoning prevention program. And now that these other funds are coming into play because of action, I'm just trying to figure out, well, what's the problem now? I mean, all the cities have housing that are affected by, lead poisoning. Of course, Oakland is the biggest city. And of course, Oakland would have been the only city a part of this program, but Oakland doesn't have its own health department. So we had to go out to other cities and to talk with them to get them to join this. And we were glad to have Berkeley, Alameda, and Emeryville to come on board because something needed to be done, not only here in Oakland, but in all the other cities that have a problem of this lead poisoning. And lead poisoning is not a joke. I mean, it's a silent killer. So I'm just trying to understand now, what's all the hoopla about, money, dollars? Is that what it's all about?
Okay. Is there anybody who would like to address Ms. Hardy's question? It's a comment, mostly she said, but okay. We'll accept that. Oh, Mr. Gilchrist. Mr. Gilchrist, are you looking to speak?
Oh, I'm sorry. I had the hard mute on. I said the program. I apologize. Yeah, just that part of what we will be doing, even with this RFP discussion, is to be setting a critical path to move this work forward. And it's something we also need to have in conversation again with our partners there at the county, and as we go through these discussions on relative roles and what's the synergy going to be. So we do also share the sense of needing to get on with this, but I think it was important for us to actually get our arms around the what, what we're going to approach, what the strategy is going to be, what we're prioritizing, get that socialized, and then again get feedback like we're getting now from you all, which has been most helpful. And I'll again defer to my colleague Ms. Simmons, Latanda, in any further statement, but yeah, the timeline and work plan is next thing.
Okay, Mr. Brooks.
Yes, in response to Director Hardy's comments and where do we go from here? It must be understood that at this point in time, we're still negotiating with the city of Oakland in terms of the detailed use of the funding, where it would be spent, how it would be spent, who would be responsible for what particular services. Those things still have to be hashed out. And I think at that point in time, once we get there, we can come up with an action plan. I don't think it'll be that difficult, as Director Hardy has indicated. This department was born out of the work of Pueblo. And over the last 30 years, we've been able to do many of the types of things that are being discussed in the presentation that you just heard. So it's just a matter of us being able to work out the details and then being able to go before the city council and the board to get approval.
Mr. Gilchrist.
No, I would just say in response to my good colleague and friend, Larry Brooks, yes, I mean, obviously the scoping of the work, both what is performed by Oakland, what's performed by county, how those resources align. I think that was also a theme through the presentation that Maribel and Darlene also set forward, that and the portion that I spoke to, that we do want to see where we get the best leverage in terms of advantage, capacity, things of that nature. But we really have to align them in a way that's effective toward the outcomes, again, that Darlene was citing. So yeah, we still have more conversation. And Latanda's point as well, she made the very same point, that we still have discussions to have. And Latanda, I turn it back to you.
And thank you.
If it please the chair, excuse me, if it please the chair.
Yes.
I will recognize Ms. Simmons. Thank you.
My apologies. Thank you so much. And just quickly, and I think we're rounding up here in all due respect. So as to the particular precision, the city of Oakland, of course, is engaging the services of some additional support to aid us in conversations with program design. We do not want to necessarily speak too far in advance, knowing that we have an important collaboration that we seek to fortify with the county in the program design. Mr. Brooks is correct. We're actually in great alignment with a number of the concepts here. We just need to design the specifics. And we believe that we can probably engage that process and move forward with the completion of the negotiations and moving forward fairly swiftly. We would ask the opportunity to reconvene with the county, continue those conversations, make some determinations about what I would call the schema of the program as we would move forward with design elements in sort of a closer layer of conversation, and then return in the near future, well, in the future, with a work plan such that it would be clear that the intentionality that we've all talked about here is incorporated to meet the equity requirements that we are talking about. Director Flynn, did you want to offer any additional comments here?
Oh, no, what I was going to say was just that certainly I'd be willing to continue to support to take it to the next level of detail with regard to work program and timeline. You covered that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna take the opportunity to, okay, Mr. Brown, go ahead. This will be the last comment. Mr. Brown.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I asked two questions and I realized I should have made a statement on behalf of the supervisor. I mean, she's committed to equity and committed to serving Oakland, and she represents a good portion of Oakland, including communities like Fruitvale and Havens Court, which are part of those on the list that you had. So she definitely wants to make sure the resources go where they need to go. She obviously represents the whole county as well. And so that's why we're just trying to figure out what makes the most sense. But thank you to the Oakland team for the presentation. And I really appreciate how clear you presented it.
Okay, thank you. So my comments, I'm going to align my comments with Director Velas. I agree with, she summarized what I would have said mostly. I appreciate everyone coming from the city of Oakland. You know, the key to, you know, I'm an umpire and I lead a national umpire team. And I always say that the love language of a successful team is communication. And so it's really important that we continue from where we started here today, because I think that one of the JPA's wanted is just communication. So we learned a lot of really good things, which I support and agree with as one member of the JPA board today. Didn't have any idea what was going on for a long time because we didn't have communication. So we just need to continue on that foot going forward, I think is my first point. I'm supportive of the analysis work that's been done. I'm a huge proponent and advocate for introducing and supporting racial equity with action and not words. So I'm totally on board with what I see coming from the report, and I believe that money of this nature is not limitless, and so it needs to be prioritized for the communities most impacted. And that part of equity to me is actually insufficient. To me, it's justice. This is an environmental and health justice issue. And so equity is a great step away from equality, but it is not justice in and of itself. So I'm very supportive of what I heard and the research that's been done. I think the only criticism I have is timelines. And that's where I would join Director Vela, is that I understand that the necessity of work, and there's always that tension between the bureaucratic need to acquire, develop, research, refine, and develop a proposal or a set of proposals or agreements or covenants between jurisdictions and entities in order to effectuate a good plan. And then from the political side, there's always the time, right? Like we spent 17 years collectively in litigation over this issue. 17 years ago, I was finishing law school. So it's a long time ago for me. And I just think about how many people have come into the lead poisoning prevention program for assistance or child-led remediation in the intervening time since we were awarded the funds. And there's clearly no expectation that the money would go out the door the first minute. But I do think that there's a balance to be had in making sure that we have a timely implementation of this. And that has been my concern over the past years, that it does not feel timely to me. So I support the work that's been done. I understand that time is necessary to do all the good work we learned about today. And I appreciate having that communicated with myself and the other members of the board. And I would just ask all the stakeholders at the staff level and at the county who are working on this to continue that communication openly, transparently, with support from us to do that. And that we will hopefully see something that we can put before the Oakland City Council and hopefully before the county to negotiate and agree upon in the near future. So with that, those are the final comments on this item. And I would like to thank everybody from the city of Oakland who joined us today for that presentation. It was very informative. And I am going to invite you to stay or leave, but we're going to move on to our next agenda item, which will be agenda item number 6, which is the director's report. Director Brooks.
Thank you, Director Botters. We begin with the report back to the JPA with regards to the prevalence on lead in toys that you had asked us to research at the prior meeting.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that Ladise has some slides that we're going to share with you. Here we go. So we did some looking back on this issue to see how prevalent it has been within the county, within the state, in fact, as far as toys with lead. And some may even remember, next slide, how the Healthy Homes Department really got embraced in this issue way back in 2007 when Fisher Price and Mattel recalled millions of toys that had lead. And we had to do a multitude of outreach events in order to try to educate the public and quell their fears. And some of that led to the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act that was signed into law in 2008. And this law made consumer products safer by requiring that toys and infant products be tested to mandatory standards before they are sold. And also the Consumer Product Safety Commission, their inspectors began to conduct random tests And I have to say that based on that, those actions, it seems to be working. Next slide, please. Because the data suggests that the California Department of Public Health Child Lead Poisoning Prevention Branch, over the last 5 years, there has been only 2 instances recorded in their database where toys were identified as the likely source of the lead poisoning. And here within the Healthy Homes Department, researching our data, in the last 25 years, there's only been 1 case where a toy was identified as the likely source. So we believe that the actions taken back in 2008 are paying off. Also, as a result of the occurrence back in 2007, next slide, please. The Healthy Homes Department began working very closely with families, providing them with information and education, warning them on the possible dangers of lead in toys during many of our home visits. And we include a lot of information with regards to lead in toys and other products, other sources on our website. Next slide. Also, as a result of those occurrences back in 2007, we've, over the last several years, built up quite a few collaborations with organizations to ensure that new parents are aware of the possible dangers of lead in toys. And this is just a partial list of some of those partnerships, collaborations that we have built up. But I do want to say that even though the data seems to suggest that there's not a lot of lead being found in toys, that it's very, very rare, that we still have to be vigilant, because I remember reporting to the JPA just about 3 years ago where the State Department of Toxics had actually found a number of stores in Oakland on International Boulevard, in fact, near the Fruitvale District, that had these, what would they call it, toy jewelry, that hair berets, and little necklaces, bracelets, other types of jewelry products that were tainted with lead, and State Department of Toxic Substances and Control was able to get all that stuff out of those stores, and we were able to do a huge public awareness campaign to put people on notice that that had occurred. So I think in spite of the successes that we've had, we still need to be vigilant. We still need to be putting information out in terms of these dangers that can be found in various products. So that was it for the report back on lead in toys. Do you have any questions, directors?
Okay, are there any questions from directors about the report back on toys and the prevalence of lead? Okay, Ladisa, did we receive any public comment for this item?
No public comment?
Director Brooks, is there more in the director's report?
Yes, Director Botters, we also needed to give you an update on the county service area ballot measure letter that the JPA directed us to begin drafting, that you wish to provide to the Board of Supervisors. And we are working on that with County Council. Just for those who may not be aware, I have a few slides. Ladisa, if you could share those slides. This has not been the first time, next slide, that we have attempted to do something with the ballot measure. As you see here, there was actually a consulting firm was hired to do some surveying of the possibility of a ballot measure back in 2006. And this was the ballot text that was used when they were doing some polling to see if there was a possibility that we could get the ballot measure passed. The proposal there was to raise the fee from the current $10 that was established back in 1991 to $30 per unit. Next slide. And as you can see back then, the strongest voter support was actually in Emeryville and Berkeley, but all the cities fell short in terms of the 2/3 needed to pass the ballot measure. So I just wanted people to be aware of the fact that it will be no easy task, even though 2006 was a long time ago. And we really feel that because of the economic recession during that period of time, that probably impacted the results of the polling. But now we're, in the middle of a pandemic, so we're looking at some of these same economic forecasts that existed in the past when we've tried to introduce the idea of a ballot measure. But we are putting together a letter that will be coming to the JPA to present to the board, asking them to once again follow this course of hiring someone to do the work in order to do the polling, in order to consider having a ballot measure to increase the CSA. Whoever is brought on board will also have to do the analysis to determine exactly how much of an increase to the CSA we should seek from the public, and also to add other cities to the CSA, as Director Hardy has spoken about, in terms of the origins of the CSA dollars, starting in Oakland and then Emeryville and Berkeley and the city of Alameda opting in, but no other cities did back in 1991. So that would be what we would be including in the draft letter, is the request that the board would consider a ballot measure that would include other cities in the unincorporated county. Next slide. First, before I move on to this, any questions on the CSA?
Please use your raise hand feature if you have a question. Okay, continue.
Okay. The next thing that I just wanted to mention, Adisa, if you could go down to the next slide. Right here, yes, Max Weindrup, who is the lead-based paint enforcement coordinator for the EPA Region 9, has taken a promotion. I think of it as a promotion. Maybe he thinks of it as a lateral. He is now the chief of lead hazard reduction section for the California Department of Public Health Childhood Lead Poisoning Prevention Branch. And when word got out that he was making that transition to take the place of a gentleman who I think I've mentioned in the past, Will Hale, held that position. He recently retired. When word got out that Max was coming over from the EPA, people were ecstatic. People at the California Healthy Housing Coalition were virtually dancing on tables, knowing that this man was coming over. You can read that little paragraph there and kind of get a feel for what kind of man he is and why people were so excited. I even had a official from HUD make comment at a meeting that with him coming over to the California Department of Public Health Child Lead Poisoning Prevention Branch, that she could begin to pack up her bags and retire, because she knew that this man was going to be able to do what we've been working on for years to get done in terms of lead poisoning prevention programs. So you'll be hearing from Max. We'll probably have him actually speak to the JPA after he gets settled in and oriented at the State Department of Public Health Child Lead Poisoning Prevention Branch. If there's no questions, I'll go on to the next slide here.
Yeah, we have 15 minutes before I will end the meeting, so please continue.
Okay, just a quick congratulations to some of our Healthy Home staff. Sony Johnson and David Crosby worked for many months with this reporter from Oakland side, collecting data for her to write this article, which we thought was a very good article. And we will make sure that if you haven't received a copy of the article, that we send it to you. But we thought that the reporter did a lot of in-depth reporting on these issues, and we hope to be able to follow up with her on some of the articles that she intends to write as a result of what was discovered during this report. And I just have one more quick slide. This wasn't even planned, but last night I received word that the California Association of Code Enforcement Officers will be presenting the California Healthy Housing Coalition with a award in memory of Bishop Allen. And they've established the Bishop Allen Award just this year. California Healthy Housing Coalition will be the first to receive it. And because the Healthy Homes Department is a founding member of that coalition, I was really surprised and pleased to see it. You see some of the members of the team right there from a few years ago when then HUD Secretary Hugh Castro presented us with the HUD Secretary Award for some of the Healthy Homes legislative policy work that we have done. And speaking of legislative policy work, Bishop Allen had been a real powerhouse in terms of working on legislation related to keeping people of color safe in their communities. And he and I were actually working on a collaborative strategy together for some lead legislation when unfortunately he passed away. But I feel very, very proud and honored that KCO thought so highly of him that they've now established this award and that the California Healthy Housing Coalition will be the first to receive it. So that was it for the director's report.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, was there any public comment on this item?
No public comment?
Okay, that moves us to agenda item 7, the July monthly report.
I just wanted to share with you the monthly report. One of the charts, the chart number 2, we adjusted that one to reflect the number of activities, so such as the media outreach and the mailings. So that's one of the new things that we're doing this time around this fiscal year. And that's all the comments I have.
Okay, have we any directors who have questions about the July report? Is there any public comment on the July report? Okay, seeing none.
No problem.
Move to agenda item 8, which is the end of the year outreach report for fiscal year 21.
The activities for the end of the year outreach report is basically the information that was good, or the activities that were conducted last fiscal year, July 1st, 2020 and June 30th, 2021. As you may recall, we did have the shelter in place. So the department needed to shift some of the activities from in-person meetings and person visits to doing things virtually. Did you have any questions on that?
Okay, are there any questions about the end of the year report? Is there public comment on this report? Seeing none, thank you for the report. Future agenda items. I'd like to share us all what might be happening in the Vela household right now with little ones present, and just ask that when we have our letter come back for potential presentation related to the CSA ballot measure, I'd like a separate item, because the letter will be an action item. I'd like a separate item that if Andrew, I see you're still here. I'm hoping you're actually present when I say this, but I'd like to ask if County Council would provide a brief, very brief confidential memo to us about how we navigate this with Proposition 29. So if we could please just get guidance about what we're asking for in relation to Proposition 29, so that any ask we have of the county supervisors is properly informed by legal about what would be allowed as a ballot measure. Andrew, does that request make sense?
It does. Proposition. Are you thinking of Proposition 218, which has been the constraint? In
218. You're right. Yeah.
Okay. Just to clarify.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah. So if you could provide us, just, it doesn't have to be anything grand and long. Not trying to give you homework, but if you can have it, put a couple page memo just about that and as confidential to directors, so that we have an understanding of 218 and the impacts of 218 on any potential ballot measure as it relates to the JPA's existing agreements. That would be helpful.
Happy to do so.
Thank you, Andrew. Is there anybody else on the board who has a future agenda item? Okay, seeing none, staff will provide the regular updates that we normally receive here in this meeting. If something comes up between now and then, Larry is going to be working on that draft letter. We'll have that on the agenda as well. Are there any announcements by Board of Director members? I have one, which is just, as you recall, we moved this meeting mostly in gratitude to all of you to today to accommodate me, which I don't usually try to do at all. But I appreciate you moving this to today. So on Sunday, I will be going to Chicago, and on Tuesday morning, I will be again a 300+ mile solo backcountry survival hiking trip that I've planned for about a year now between Canada and Wisconsin. I will have no email, no phone. All there will be is a little tiny GPS tracker attached to me in case a bear drags me out into a den or I fall off a cliff into Lake Superior. So I just want to wish all of you a wonderful start to the fall season. I will be back on grid sometime at the end of the first week of October is my hope. And so Larry, any letter drafts or things you want to review, that if they're not to me by Friday, they will wait until October before our meeting.
Understood.
Thank you. That's my announcement. If you want to follow me, you can actually, there will be a publicly accessible link to the GPS will update my location on the globe every 30 minutes, and you'll be able to see exactly where I'm at in the woods, zoom in map and everything. So that's my announcement. Let's see. If there's nothing else, time is 1:51 p.m. Ladisa and I've adjourned this meeting. You all have a wonderful week.
Thank you, Director Botters. I'm praying for your safety, and yes, send me that link.
Okay, I will do that. Take care.
Adisa, does it just stop recording, or do you have to click something?
I'm stopping right now.
Okay, gotcha.